The rain began to fall as Emily drove down the lonely, winding road through the forest. It was late, and the rhythmic sound of the raindrops against the windshield was the only thing keeping her awake. She'd been driving for hours, trying to escape the suffocating pressures of her life. Her mind was a jumble of thoughts, work, relationships. Everything seemed to be falling apart. She just needed a break, a moment of peace. The GPS signal had cut out miles ago, and she hadn't seen another car in at least an hour. The deeper she went into the woods, the darker it became. The trees loomed over the road, their branches like skeletal hands reaching for her car. A sign came into view, illuminated by her headlights, "Welcome to Black Hollow." She didn't remember seeing it on the map, but she figured she'd take a quick rest there. She was too tired to care anymore. The town was eerily quiet when she arrived. The rain fell harder, turning the narrow streets into rivers of black water. There was no one outside, no lights on in any of the houses. The place looked abandoned, but a small diner at the end of the street had a flickering neon sign, "Open 24 hours. Needing to stretch her legs and maybe grab a coffee, Emily parked and stepped out into the rain. As she walked towards the diner, she could feel a strange sensation crawling up her spine, as if something unseen was watching her. The rain was cold and relentless, soaking her to the bone within seconds. When she pushed the door open, a bell jingled, and the smell of stale coffee and grease hit her. Inside, the diner was just as empty as the streets. An old man stood behind the counter, wiping a glass with a rag that looked older than time itself. "Coffee?" he asked without looking up. Emily nodded. Taking a seat at the counter, the man poured her a cup, and she wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. She took a sip, the bitter liquid grounding her for a moment, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. In fact, it had intensified. "Strange night for a drive," the old man said, his voice gravelly. He finally looked up, his eyes cold and vacant. "You should have kept driving." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, muttering something under his breath that Emily couldn't quite catch. The feeling of unease grew. She looked around the diner. There was a mirror on the far wall, and in its reflection, she thought she saw someone sitting in the booth behind her. She spun around, but the booth was empty. She stood up, her heart racing. Something wasn't right. "I think I'm going to head out," she said, grabbing her jacket. "Too late," the old man whispered, his back still turned to her. "They've already found you." Emily froze. The rain outside now pounded against the windows with an unnatural force, like fists trying to break through the glass. Shadows moved just beyond the diner's dim light, figures shifting in the darkness, circling the building. Her pulse quickened as she reached for the door. "Who's out there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "They come with the rain," the old man said, his voice distant, as though he were somewhere far away. "The storm brings them, and they take whoever is unlucky enough to be caught in it." Emily threw the door open and ran out into the storm, her feet splashing through the puddles. The rain was blinding, and the dark figures were closer now, moving faster, circling her, surrounding her. She sprinted toward her car, but the closer she got, the more distorted everything seemed. The street stretched, warped, as if the town itself was shifting, trapping her inside. The figures were everywhere now, their shapes tall and inhuman, faceless but watching, always watching. Emily yanked the car door open and jumped inside, fumbling with the keys. She tried to start the engine, but it only sputtered and died. In the rearview mirror, she saw one of the figures standing directly behind her car, towering, its form barely visible through the rain. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes, were nothing but hollow pits of darkness, consuming all light. Panicking, she tried again. The engine roared to life, and she floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward, but it was like driving through thick mud. No matter how hard she pressed the pedal, the car barely moved. Then she heard it, a soft, wet voice whispering her name. "Emily." She slammed on the brakes, gasping. The voice was inside the car. She turned slowly, her hands trembling as her breath caught in her throat. In the passenger seat sat a man, soaked, pale, and smiling. His eyes were wide, too wide, and his mouth stretched impossibly across his face. "You should have stayed," he said, his voice a low rasp. "But now, it's too late." Before Emily could scream, the car's windows shattered. The rain poured in, thick and black like oil. The faceless figures reached through the broken glass, their fingers long and skeletal, pulling her out into the storm. She fought, she screamed, but their grip was cold and unyielding. They dragged her into the street, where the rain swallowed her whole. When the storm passed, the town was silent again. The diner's neon sign flickered one last time before going dark, and the streets of Black Hollow returned to their usual stillness. No one ever spoke of Emily again. In the distance, thunder rolled. The rain was coming back. Emily awoke, gasping for air. She was lying in the middle of the road, soaked to the bone, her body aching as if she'd been crushed. The rain had stopped, and the sky was a dull, oppressive gray. She slowly sat up, her head spinning, her hands trembling as they pressed against the wet asphalt. Her car was nowhere to be seen. The town of Black Hollow was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of forest on all sides. She felt an overwhelming sense of confusion and dread. But what made her blood run cold was that the silence around her wasn't natural, it was suffocating, like the entire world had been put on mute. She stood up, her legs wobbly. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice sounding hollow in the stillness. She tried to remember what had happened, but everything was a blur of shadows, rain, and fear. The road ahead stretched endlessly, disappearing into the thick fog. She couldn't stay here. She had to move, find help, find anyone. But as she took her first step forward, she heard it again, a soft, wet voice, barely audible, carried on the air like a faint breeze. Emily. Her heart lurched in her chest. She whipped around, her breath quickening, but no one was there. The road behind her was just as desolate as the one ahead. Panic clawed at her insides, and she started walking faster, then running, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the dead quiet. Emily. The voice was closer now. Her skin crawled, and she could feel something behind her, something cold and vast, watching her every move. She sprinted down the road, but no matter how fast she ran, it felt like she was trapped in place, like the world itself was stretching around her, mocking her attempts to escape. Suddenly, she saw it, up ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road, unmoving. As she got closer, she could make out the details. It was the old man from the diner, but his skin was pale and waxy, his eyes empty voids of blackness. He smiled that same terrible smile she'd seen in her car. "You're still here, Emily," he said, his voice a sickening drawl. "Still trapped in the rain. They never really let you go." "No," she screamed, backing away. "This isn't real. You can't be real." But the old man only laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. "This is as real as it gets. Girl, you're part of the storm now." Before she could react, the ground beneath her feet began to shift. The road cracked and crumbled, and the asphalt melted into a thick, black liquid that bubbled and hissed like boiling tar. She stumbled, trying to get away, but the substance was rising, swallowing the road, the trees, everything in sight. Her feet sank into the black muck, and she screamed as it pulled her down, its icy grip dragging her deeper into the darkness. She clawed at the air, but there was nothing to hold on to, nothing to save her. The more she struggled, the faster she sank. The figures appeared again, emerging from the black sludge, tall, faceless, their long fingers reaching for her, pulling her under. Their whispers filled her ears, louder and louder until it was all she could hear. "Emily! Emily! Emily!" She was submerged, the thick liquid filling her lungs, her vision going dark as the rain began to fall again. She thrashed in the darkness, her mind screaming for air, for escape. But the world around her had dissolved into nothingness. She was trapped, consumed by the storm. And then, suddenly, the darkness cleared. She was standing on the same road again, the sky the same dull gray, the forest the same endless wall of trees. It was as if nothing had happened. The rain began to fall once more. But this time, Emily didn't run. She couldn't. Her legs wouldn't move. She looked down and saw the truth. Her body was sinking into the road itself, her feet dissolving into the black asphalt like it was consuming her piece by piece. She screamed, but no sound came out. The rain was no longer just rain, it was alive, pouring over her like acid, burning through her skin. She felt herself being absorbed into the very fabric of the road, becoming one with the storm. She was no longer Emily, she was nothing. And then, as her vision faded for the final time, she realized the true horror. She wasn't the first. This had happened before. And it would happen again. The figures in the rain weren't just specters or ghosts, they were the souls of those who had been caught in the storm before her, forever trapped in the endless cycle. And now, she was one of them. The next time it rained, the storm would return, and Emily would be waiting in it, just like they had. Forever. The rain continued to fall, its steady rhythm drumming against the hollowed road as if it were calling for more. And in that endless downpour, Emily's consciousness drifted, no longer bound by her body, no longer alive but not truly dead. She was in the storm now, dissolved into its malevolent force, yet she remained aware. She could still feel. She wasn't alone. Whispers surrounded her, low and mournful, echoing through the mist like the lost voices of forgotten souls. They weren't just the people of Black Hollow. There were countless others who had been caught in this never-ending nightmare over centuries, perhaps longer, people like her, pulled into the storm, swallowed by the town that existed between realities. Trapped. Days, weeks, months, she couldn't tell anymore how long she had been here. Time had no meaning. She had forgotten who she was. The memory of her name, her life before, had eroded like the landscape around her. She was now nothing more than a shadow, a wisp of thought drifting in the dark, waiting for the next soul to stumble into the storm. And they always did. It was a quiet night when the first signs of another arrival appeared, a distant rumble of thunder, faint but ominous. The sky began to darken unnaturally fast, the heavy cloud swirling above the trees like a giant, living thing. Emily, if she could still be called that, watched from her prison within the storm. She had no choice but to wait and witness what was coming. The road stretched out endlessly, and through the mist, she saw it, a car, headlights cutting through the fog. It was old and rusted, clearly on its last legs, but it sped down the road as if the driver had no idea what was waiting for them. Emily could feel their fear, their confusion, as they approached Black Hollow. Another one. She recognized it now, the pattern. It always began the same way. They were drawn here, lured by the storm's pull, by its promise of an escape from their own lives. The storm wanted them, just as it had wanted her. The car slowed as it neared the entrance to the town, and Emily could hear the whispering of the others, those who had been taken before her, calling out, eager for a new victim. Help me, run. But the driver never heard. They never heard the warnings, not until it was too late. The car pulled up to the diner, the same diner where it had all begun for her. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, with a nervous look on his face. The rain had already started to fall, thick and heavy, soaking him instantly. He glanced up at the diner's flickering neon sign, then at the empty street. Hello? The man called out, his voice shaky, barely audible over the rain. No one answered. No one ever did. Emily watched helplessly as the man hesitated at the diner's door, the same old man behind the counter inside. Just as before, this time, she felt something different stir within her, a strange, twisted sense of anticipation. She no longer wanted to help. She no longer could help. She wanted him to join her. The storm whispered louder now, and Emily's voice joined it, blending with the others, calling to the man from the shadows of the rain. He glanced around, sensing something was off, but it was too late. He was already part of it. The old man inside gave him that same cold, dead-eyed look. The diner was a trap, just like everything else. The young man would make the same choices, fall into the same trap, as countless others had. He would be swallowed by the storm, just like Emily had been. And when the moment came, when the darkness closed in and the road started to melt beneath him, she would feel nothing but satisfaction. She no longer feared it. She was part of it. Emily's last shred of humanity dissolved as she whispered his name through the rain, her voice echoing with the others, calling him into the abyss. Welcome to Black Hollow. The rain would never stop, and neither would the storm. In time, Emily would forget this man's name too. His soul would join hers. Trapped in the storm's endless cycle, they would wait together, in the rain, for the next unfortunate soul. Because the storm always needed more. And it would always find them.